Hare Krishna. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Jai Shri Vaishnavas, Vaishnavis everywhere. Welcome to our final stream in chapter 8 of Bhagavad Gita as it is. Please join me. We're going to do 23 to 28, so 6 verses, which I guess is like 1.5 clusters. Anyway, please join me in honoring the masters and their work. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Okay. Let's do the literal translation first from Mr. H.D. Goswami. And yep, just as I thought, this big cluster is how it's grouped in this book as well. All right, here's verse 23 through 28. O best of Bharatas, I shall now tell you those times at which departing yogis either return or do not return. Brahman knowing persons who depart during fire, light, day, waxing moon, and the sun's 6-month journey north go to Brahman. But that yogi returns who departs during smoke, night, waning moon, and the sun's 6-month journey south, reaching moon's light. Now, these light and dark passages from the world are considered perpetual. By one path, one does not return, and by the other, one does. Knowing these two paths, Partha, a yogi is never baffled. Be thus always linked in yoga, Arjuna. A yogi, knowing all this, surpasses whatever auspicious fruit is indicated in the Vedas, in sacrifices, in penance, and also in charities, and comes to the supreme original status. Okay, one difference I noticed just reading this now. Here in the last verse, it says, a yogi surpasses all of the auspicious fruit, sacrifice, charity, and so on. But as we'll hear later in Prabhupada's translation, Prabhupada doesn't really talk about surpassing all the other ones. He uses it and he talks about it in a double negative sense, meaning it's not that a yogi does so much better, it's that a yogi does not lose, not double negative, sorry, something like that. But a yogi is not bereft, is not lacking. It's kind of like double negative, but not technically. Anyway, a yogi is not lacking from all of the good things that can come from all the additional work. So the idea we get, as we'll see later in verse 28, is, I mean, yes, it's true that you get, all those great benefits, but it's not so much, I mean, the idea I got from reading these verses is not that it's better, but more that it's you don't need to worry about doing all the yogic practices perfectly, doing the right charities and sacrifices, and doing it all super, super perfectly, which is what Krishna's been talking about these past 2 chapters. But now he's saying, you don't have to worry about that, basically. Just focus directly on God and devotion, and then everything will come, including the time that you die. You'll just die when you're supposed to die, and you'll go to most likely some kind of higher Vaikuntha planet, assuming you're actually doing this correctly, appropriately, and so on. Okay, let's get to verse 23 in Prabhupada's translation. O best of the Bharatas, I shall now explain to you the different times at which passing away from this world one does or does not come back. So this little verse cluster here, and there's a bunch of other things like this in the Gita, this is very unique, I think, compared to pretty much every other major religious text that I know of. There are, for example, severe dietary laws and restrictions in like all of them, kosher laws, halal laws, and so on. But instructions on how to die and what time to die is correct and so on. First of all, this is only in the Eastern traditions and none of the Western traditions. That's first of all. And second of all, even the other Eastern tradition, I'm thinking of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, for instance, it's not really about timing. It's just about another kind of yoga, another kind of practice you can do whenever you're near death. And honestly, I think that's effective too. That actually does agree with what Krishna says in the end of these verses. But in the beginning, he's going to continue with what he's already been saying so far, which is, all the technical stuff. This time is good. This time is bad. He's just giving the cold, hard truth as it is, explicitly and technically accurate for free. That's actually very rare in this field, and this time especially in 2024 AD. It's quite rare to get this sort of confidential and technical knowledge. But what is really important, what is the essential truth here? Well, it's what Prabhupada says in the very first sentence of the purport. Quote, the unalloyed devotees of the Supreme Lord who are totally surrendered souls do not care when they leave their bodies or by what method. Second sentence, they leave everything in Krishna's hands and so easily and happily return to Godhead. Unquote. So that's it. From that first sentence of the purport all the way to the last part of the purport in the last verse in this chapter, that's the truth. Nothing essentially changes, regardless of all the different technicalities we're going to go through here. And as you might expect, for most of these verses, there's a pretty short purport because it's very explicit and technical and, well, frankly, irrelevant. Not entirely irrelevant. Like, I think it's interesting, but it's not. This doesn't tell you how to be a devotee. It doesn't tell you how to get in touch with your soul or anything like that. It's just like, oh, by the way, when you're on your way out, these times are good, these times are bad. And yes, Prabhupada writes here, it's true, if the yogi is perfect, he can select the time and place for leaving this material world. How many people do we know who can do that? Not many. Even among yogis, it's probably not so common to meet someone who can consciously decide when they will quit their bodies. Okay, 24. Those who know the Supreme Brahman pass away from the world during the influence of the fiery god in the light at an auspicious moment during the fortnight of the moon and the 6 months when the sun travels in the north. So, if you've been reading and studying as long as I have, you know fiery god actually means more like fire god or the god of fire, Agni. But then you might also know that Agni Deva is a god, but he's also, I believe he's like in fire. I mean, that word Agni is used to mean fire and to mean the god of fire as well. So I'm still learning the intricacies of this. And within this verse, I don't know what that means. Like what times? Well, clearly there's only 12 months in the year, and there's only 6 months. It's sometime within these 6 months that the sun is traveling north that the god of fire is active. So it could be like every other day, something like that. But yeah, and then in the next verse it talks about during the smoke. So after fire comes smoke. So I think you need to study Vedic astrology to know this. But basic logic would say that when the fire god is not active in the sky, or just after the fire god is active, that's when the smoke is active. And then after the smoke runs out, then you go back to the fire god and they switch back and forth. Just like day and night switch back and forth in cycles. And the 6 months of the sun going through the north is one part of the cycle, and then the 6 months it goes through the south is the other part of the cycle. The moon is waning, then the moon is waxing. These are just the duality of the cycles, the rhythm of the natural cycles. Oh yeah, and this translation is quite a bit different. Prabhupada says the fortnight of the moon. Don't know what that means. H.D. Goswami said, I believe, when the moon is waxing, and then in the next verse he said when the moon is waning. Let me make sure of that. Yep. When the moon is growing bigger. So that's happening every month. So the ideal time will be sometime within one of those 6 months, the sun is going to the north where the moon is getting bigger. So it's going from small to big. Okay, so the influence of Agni, and then in the light, and then at an auspicious moment, though that's not actually in the Sanskrit of the verse, but glad Prabhupada put that in there though, because obviously that's important. And then during the fortnight of the moon, and then the 6 months. So there's only day or night every day. So sometime during the daylight is good. And then within the daylight, within those available daylight times, sometimes there's the fire god and sometimes there is not. Sometimes the moon is waxing, that's good, and sometimes it's waning, which is bad. And I'm assuming it's 6 consecutive months of the year where the sun travels in the north. And then the next 6 consecutive months, the sun is waning. I am not an astrologist or an astronomer. I don't know any of this stuff. I do think it's interesting. But it's all, at least it's all, like I said, this is a unique and excellent part of the Gita, is that the information is given explicitly, practically, as it is, for free of charge. Some of these things you don't need to be an astrologer. I think you can just Google, like, what time of the year is the sun traveling in the north? I think you can Google that. As far as the fire god, I don't know about that. I think you need to, or at least you need to be good at Google and Vedic astrology. And then, of course, if it really is as simple as, yeah, and the next verse Prabhupada says the moonless fortnight. So fortnight is like half a month, right? So the half of the month where it's waning or waxing, that seems to be the accurate translation. So you can Google that as well. I mean, or you can just look out in the sky. But you just need a few days to measure if it's getting bigger or smaller. But yeah, if you can see the moon at night and you just record its size with your eyes for 3 or 4 days, you'll know if it's waning or waxing at this, where you are in the cycle. If the sun is moving north or not, you can probably do that with your eyes as well. But for me, like, I'd have to prepare a bit, get a compass out, I guess, and like, how does the sun travel? Because every day it goes east to west, right? So if it's always east to west, how is it sometimes north and sometimes south? This is quite a puzzle. Perhaps some later time, I'll go through this again. Now, fortunately, the one things that any layman can understand from this verse is also the most essential part of the verse, that someone who does know the Supreme Brahman and will go back to Brahman will leave their body during the daytime at an auspicious moment. That's, I think, the most essential part. The most essential difference between verse 24, 25, when you leave the body. So daytime, light, it's so simple, right? Light is God, light is good. Go during light, you go to God. Night is bad, night is darkness, night is ignorance. So quit the body at night, well, that's where you go. I'm really curious how to control in the final days. What should one do to say, okay, I want today, maybe this day is a good day to die? Or if you're not sure and you're like going to sleep, oh no, I might not wake up this night, but I'm not supposed to quit the body at the night. What do I do? Drink some coffee? Like, I don't know. Plan it a few days in advance? I don't know. I'm trying. It's kind of like silly, right? When you're not that kind of yogi, but you try to be like, do some quick hack to like get close to being able to kind of get there. No, it's not worth it. Interesting to think about, perhaps. Now, fortunately, in the purport, Prabhupada clarifies that when Krishna says Supreme Brahman, it means impersonal Brahma Jyoti. Because that can definitely get the word Brahma is used so many different times in so many different ways by Krishna in the Gita. That's when these purports become vital to our understanding. And in the last sentence of the purport, Prabhupada says, however, for the pure devotee in Krishna consciousness, there is no fear of returning, whether he leaves the body at an auspicious or inauspicious moment, by accident or arrangement. Same thing we've already gone over. If you're simply doing Krishna bhakti, you're good. It doesn't really matter. You don't have to worry about what time you die. It doesn't matter when, in fact, you die. It doesn't matter. If Krishna wants to bring you back home, he will simply bring you back home. 25. The mystic who passes away from this world during the smoke, the night, the moonless fortnight, or in the 6 months when the sun passes to the south, or who reaches the moon planet, again comes back. Really short purport. The only thing Prabhupada talks about here is the moon planet. What is the moon? Well, the moon is this place where really advanced people go to at death, and it's like heaven, basically. You live there for about 10,000 years by demigod calculations. I don't know what that means. Does that mean? I think that means 10,000 demigod years. Or maybe it means we only know it's 10,000 years because the demigod gave that to us in Shastra based on what the demigod thought would be how to calculate it in human years. And you drink Soma Rasa. Then, but still, eventually you come back to Earth. And of course, what does this mean? It means we cannot perceive by the gross senses what's happening on the moon. Part of me thinks that Prabhupada put this in the purport here to give a nod to what he said earlier about in other circumstances about how the Americans did not land on the moon, and there was also the timing. 1972, this Gita was published. This was recent, so recent. The so-called moon landing was so recent in everyone's consciousness. And so if you're an English speaker, especially an American at that time, and you read a purport like this, it's like, what? And then you also compare that with what Prabhupada said, oh, no, we didn't land on the moon. Those are really, really big statements. Just like so many big statements that Krishna makes a really big statement in the Gita. Krishna says, I'm God. I'm the supreme God of the universe, and I live in your heart. And he makes really big claims. And this is what magnanimity means, why that's a virtue to be listed here. When you really have high knowledge, high power, and so on, you have to be responsible about it, which means sometimes you just have to say honestly what you know to be true. But the benefit for us, though, is that it leaves us with very little playground. So basically, when someone makes a really big claim like this, that, oh, actually the moon is a heavenly planet and there are people living there 10,000 plus years, and we can't see them at all with our gross senses, it's such a huge claim, huge and fantastical claim. It's either definitely true or definitely false. And so, if you're the kind of person who thinks it's definitely false, then great, go away. Seriously, that's basically how it works. If you don't belong here with us, that's fine. We're going to make it easy for you to leave. But if you might belong here with us, we're going to make it really, maybe not easy for you to come with us, but we're going to make it very explicit so you know what you have to be on board with. like the holy cow thing is another thing. If you really love beef and killing cows and whatever, that sort of thing, like there's only, you can still benefit from the Gita, but to really get close to Krishna is going to be hard. It's just going to be hard because that's just part of the deal, you know? And if you think Hitler's a really bad man, you're going to have trouble with hearing those Prabhupada quotes where Prabhupada says, oh, actually, Hitler wasn't that bad, and these sorts of things. You're going to have trouble. I have trouble myself. I can't just fully accept all of this, no problem. And another problem I see with a lot of the Hindu body devotees is they just, play the ostrich game, where when someone says, Prabhupada said we never landed on the moon. And so he would also, therefore it's also logical that the recent Indian lunar mission and Chinese and whatever, they're also all failures and liars. A lot of them don't want to hear that. It's not that they don't believe it, or they just go la 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 la, just bury their head in the sand. Because it feels good to be proud of your nation and so on, and it also feels good to know the truth and to speak the truth. But sometimes it's just way too hard to accept the truth, and that's why a lot of people do not do that. It's just too hard psychologically for a lot of people. 26. Oh, wait, I have a lot of notes here on 25 for some reason. Oh, yeah, and I already talked about this. Moonless fortnight is a good clarification compared to the previous verse. In my notes, I wrote highly visible moon. Is what that it said in the previous verse. And H.D. Goswami's translation I read for the first time today during this stream. I've read that whole book before, but I did not read that translation when preparing for this live stream. So that's why it's nice. It's nice to prepare, and even sometimes when you prepare, you still don't understand, and then you actually do the real thing, and then you actually get a proper glimpse at the truth. There are also times I don't prepare, and I still get a good glimpse of the truth anyway. But it all depends. I've got a decent amount of time this weekend, so I'm doing a bit more verses. I have a bit more time to prepare. And we're like halfway done already, and it's 30 minutes, though that's not bad either. Yeah, wish I knew more about the fire god and smoke part. Okay, 26. According to the Vedas, there are two ways of passing from this world, one in light and one in darkness. When one passes in light, he does not come back. But when one passes in darkness, he returns. And this is also found in the Chandogya Upanishad. And those who do not surrender to Krishna, they're always coming and going, including, and Prabhupada says in English, the fruitive laborers and philosophical speculators. In Sanskrit, we could call them the karmis and the jnanis. Doesn't mean it's bad to do action. Doesn't mean it's bad to do philosophy, just the opposite. We should do good action and good philosophy all the time. But when that's your only goal, when that's the only thing you know and you don't know where it comes from, you're lost and you're bound to continue being lost. going back to what we read the beginning of this chapter, what one is focusing on at the moment of death, that is where they will go to next. It's the same within this lifetime as well. If you're just doing mundane karma and philosophy all the time, you're just going to keep doing it. Even if you die, okay, you'll just continue doing it in another body, though. 27. The devotees who know these two paths, O Arjuna, are never bewildered. Therefore, be always fixed in devotion. So these last two verses don't really feel like a cluster. It feels more like the conclusion to the chapter. Like these two verses are just how to conclude the whole chapter. And you could see the whole chapter as just a big cluster. Once again, we're still on this geometry theme because that's part of who I am. And math. I like math and I like geometry. So, in the purport, I really liked how Prabhupada gave a big nod to ethos, what Aristotle focused on, what I still focus on to this day. What Prabhupada specifically says is that that should be verse 28. Oh, there's 2 times I use ethos in my notes here. So that'll be next verse when we talk about that. Oh, so yeah, so what's interesting in this verse is that now Krishna himself is telling us, don't worry. The same thing Prabhupada said, the same ethos, the same way, whatever, the same point Prabhupada made in the very beginning, the first sentence of the first purport in this cluster, is that, if you're a yogi, if you're a devotee, it doesn't matter. Relax. Like, it doesn't matter. Now, Krishna tells us explicitly that same thing. These devotees are never bewildered. If you know these two paths and you're a devotee, you're never bewildered. So just always be fixed in devotion, and then you're good. And yoga yukta is used in this verse. Prabhupada mentions it here. It means one who is firm in yoga is constantly engaged in Krishna consciousness in all his activities. And Srila Rupa Goswami advises one should be unattached to the material world, and all affairs should be steeped in Krishna consciousness. Therefore, the devotee is not disturbed. His passage to the supreme abode is guaranteed by devotional service. Verse 28, a person who accepts the path of devotional service is not bereft of the results derived from studying the Vedas, performing austere sacrifices, giving charity, or pursuing philosophical and fruitive activities. At the end, he reaches the supreme abode. I'm going to look in the Sanskrit now about the not bereft part there, which H.D. Goswami said was surpassing. Let's see what it says in the word-for-word translation. Yep, surpasses. Actually, Prabhupada uses that same word, surpasses, for the Sanskrit word atyeti. Viditva, knowing the Supreme. The yogi who knows the Supreme, param viditva. No, sorry, Supreme Abode. Surpasses all those described above. So you can study the Vedas, sacrifice, austerities, and also certainly charities. That which the result of pious work is directed, that which the result of pious work is directed surpasses all those described above, knowing the devotee supreme abode achieved peace, the original supreme abode, achieving peace. What is the devotee knows what? So Prabhupada says, a person who accepts the path of devotional service. And that corresponds to viditva, yogi, like a yogi who kind of knows devotion. Let's go back to H.T. Goswami. A yogi knowing all this, all those described above. So knowing this, I think, just means going back to the last verse. Surpasses the fruit of all those from the Vedas, blah, blah, blah. Oh, one interesting difference is that H.T. Goswami says, goes back to the supreme original status, but Prabhupada says the supreme abode. And that's in both translations, abode, English translation, and then the word for word, sthanam, means abode also. Interesting. So a yogi knowing all this. What does a yogi know? A yogi knows the two paths we've been talking about, dying during light, dying during night, and all the different fruits, all the results of pious work that one can achieve. Knowing all this, the yogi still surpasses all of this and attains the supreme abode. I think that's a good summary of the translations. So, and this is a very strong conclusion here. And Krishna, in this last verse, just basically going stronger than he did in the one before that, where he's saying, not only does it not matter what time of day do you quit your body, but even if you do all these advanced yogas, austerities, charities, and so on, it doesn't matter. If one simply accepts and follows Krishna's instructions purely as it is, all of the benefits are automatically granted, and more than that as well. Prabhupada says, this verse is the summation of the 7th and 8th chapters, particularly as the chapters deal with Krishna consciousness and devotional service. And then in the second paragraph, we get what I aforementioned about ethos. Prabhupada says, why do we study the Vedas? It is not meant for the recreation of armchair speculators, but for the formation of character. And character, in Greek and Sanskrit and English, as far as it pretty much in all of these languages, it doesn't just mean character of the individual. It's also the character of society. So that's where Varnashram Dharma comes in, right? So it's not just that, we should study these Vedas and improve ourselves, but our friends, our family, they will also be doing this. And all together, we are improving in our character. And I think when Prabhupada says not meant for the recreation of armchair speculators, I think he's actually mostly referring to his Hindu Indian brothers and sisters, even more so than people like me, like the Westerners who have an intellectual tendency. And, we start reading the Vedas and start, doing our little speculation thing, but doing it with the Vedas instead. That is a concern, but I don't think it's a main concern for Prabhupada because he did such a good job translating and purporting this Gita. So from the very beginning, this is about practice. This is about yoga. This is not about philosophy, and definitely not about speculation. You could say philosophy, but a better word is theology. But a better word than that is actually ontology. So Bhagavad Gita is a spiritual science text and an ontological text. And a transcendental text. Those are the best words to describe it. It's not actually philosophy. And you could actually even say a lot of Aristotle's work is not philosophy. Aristotle is the summary of philosophy, the conclusion of Greek philosophy. But if you want to actually read and study philosophy, that's Socrates. That's asking questions and discourse, and you don't know the answer yet. And that's philosophy. That's the practice of study and inquiring and being curious and so on. That's really what philosophy means. And yep, sure enough, Prabhupada refers exactly to Varnashram. He doesn't use the word Varnashram, but he says, okay, brahmachari should first study in the home of the spiritual master like a servant. Then later he can graduate and marry, be a householder, then vanaprastha, and finally sannyas, and can be elevated to the perfectional stage of life and be liberated, go to the Brahmajyoti or Vaikuntha or Krishna Loka. This is the path outlined by Vedic literatures. The beauty of Krishna consciousness, however, is that by one stroke, by engaging in devotional service, one can surpass all rituals of the different orders of life. Once again, there's the word surpass being used in the purport, which is almost definitely a nod to the word Krishna uses in the verse, which atyeti, which Prabhupada translates, and H.D. Goswami translates as surpass. And Prabhupada reiterates the point again in the last paragraph. One should try to understand the 7th and 8th chapters of the Gita, not by scholarship or mental speculation, but by hearing them in the association with pure devotees. The essence of practicing the Gita, not really you need it to understand it as well, but really to live the Gita, it's not enough to read it and understand it. You have to, this is a devotional text, so it should be studied and practiced in devotion as well. We have to read the Gita like a devotee and also in association with devotees. Otherwise, we just might not get it. we might think we get it, but we really don't get it. It's like Jesus says, you, and also this from an Old Testament prophet as well, I think. If one has the eyes to see, he can see. And if one has the ears to hear, he can hear. But if you don't have the eyes to see, if you don't have the ears to hear, you won't hear it, you won't see it. Doesn't matter what kind of evidence you're given, how beautiful the picture is, you're not going to see it. Doesn't matter how beautiful the poetry is, you're not going to hear it. The message is not going to take if you're not ready to take it. Chapters 6 through 12 are the essence of the Gita. These are the middle 6 chapters. Prabhupada goes even further than Krishna by saying, if one is fortunate to understand the Gita, especially these middle 6 chapters, in the association of devotees, then his life at once becomes glorified beyond all penances, sacrifices, charities, speculation, etc. I'm saying that's going farther than what Krishna says, because Prabhupada mentions the same things, penance, sacrifice, charity, but Krishna says, it's a devotee. It's someone who accepts the path of devotional service, and someone who is situated in yoga. They're a yogi. They've been practicing. Prabhupada doesn't actually say that. He says, just understanding the Gita, one becomes glorified beyond everything else. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't have a sadhana and so on. Prabhupada, I think, is saying that to show, to glorify the Gita, basically, to glorify Krishna and to glorify the Gita, because it really is that powerful. And because it's that powerful, it's because it's so far above and beyond our pay grade, we have to accept it in the right way so that it actually can take within us, so that seed can be planted in good soil, once again, to use a Jesus parable. Now it says here at the beginning of the 4th chapter is stated that the Gita can only be perfectly understood by devotees. I didn't have time to find that verse. I really want to find that, put that in my notes. It reminded me a lot of how Aristotle said that his system of ethics, which I call ethos, while it's very great and works and it's awesome, whatever, well, Aristotle explicitly said, unless you're trained from a young age to practice this, it probably won't work. You simply have to start it from a very young age, from a very good teacher, otherwise it won't work. And Krishna and Prabhupada are saying a similar thing, but in a different context, namely, you must study and practice the Gita in devotion with devotee association. Otherwise, it probably just won't work. And I think that's why, even though I haven't distributed that many Gitas, but the ones I have distributed, I don't think any of them have taken to this path, because they're reading by themselves with their own faulty egos and so on, and they're just not ready or qualified or whatever to accept it, to take it. It's not easy, even though, like, for me, the Bhagavad Gita is a beginner text, actually. It's lower intermediate. As far as ancient philosophy goes, it's not advanced. It's not that complicated to understand. Conceptually, it's not that hard. It's actually pretty easy compared to so many other things you can read. So many other wisdom texts. This is a much easier one to read. And that's why I glorify the Gita. That's one of my favorite parts about it. It's so short, it's so concise, it's so explicit, it's so clear, clean, and so on. But at the same time, because of its nature, because it's a devotional text, even if you do understand it conceptually, if you don't understand it in devotion, then you still don't have it. Going back to what Prabhupada said, if one is fortunate to understand the Gita, I don't think he means conceptually understand here. I think he means same thing Krishna means, understand, stand under it, to accept it in devotion, and so on. I'm going to read the end of the purport here. It sounds really beautiful. So you get association of devotees. You're reading the Gita. And then Krishna's activities, form, pastimes, name, etc. become clear. And all misgivings are dispelled. Then, once doubts are removed, the study of the Gita becomes extremely pleasurable. And one develops a taste and feeling for Krishna consciousness. In the advanced stage, one falls completely in love with Krishna, and that is the beginning of the highest perfectional stage of life, which prepares the devotee's transferal to Krishna's abode in the spiritual sky, Goloka Vrindavan, where the devotee enters into eternal happiness. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports to the 8th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the matter of attaining the Supreme. Next time, we'll start chapter 9, the most confidential knowledge. Thanks for playing. Thanks for hanging out. Hare Krishna. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Jai Shri Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis everywhere. Hare Bol.